Hey everybody, this is Dawn with Painted Willow Art. I have got a new paint along for you today. We're going to make a cute little whimsical rabbit. A couple weeks ago somebody asked for more whimsical animals like a rabbit or a mouse, and I have this little wild rabbit that runs around my backyard, so we're going to do a rabbit today. Supplies that we need will be pencil and eraser to draw with. I'm going to use my round number 8 watercolor brush. And I have not decided yet if I'm going to outline it and add highlights with marker or colored pencil. Might be both, I haven't decided yet. So I have a black extra fine point Sharpie and I have a black colored pencil. Excuse me. I also have my watercolors, some jars of water off to the side. This set of watercolors is an Art Philosophy Co. Watercolor Confections Tropical set. You can use whatever watercolors you have. You don't have to have the exact same watercolor sets or colors that I have. Whatever you've got is perfectly fine. And I have got a 9x12 piece of acrylic paper that I'm going to use. Watercolor paper is just fine. I think I mentioned in every one of my videos why I like this paper, and I'll continue to mention it because we have new people watching and I don't know who starts with what video. So I prefer this paper because it's a little bit thicker. Normal watercolor paper is 140 pounds. This is 236 or 238, something like that. So what that means is that it's not going to warp quite as badly when you put water on it. It also has a bit of a linen finish and I like the texture. So that's why I use this paper. So this cute little whimsical rabbit we're going to do today, you will see it on the main initial screen of the video. I don't have it to show you because I haven't painted it yet. I'm going to add that to the video after. So I don't have a picture to show you where you're going to start, so hopefully you will indulge me and play along as we go. We're going to make a whimsical rabbit that goes top to bottom on this page. And we're going to start by drawing a triangle with rounded corners. And I want this triangle to be, I don't know, maybe 2/3 of the height of my paper. I'm going to round off the corners. And you can make it as fat or as narrow as you would like it to be. I think that will be good for mine. Let me check the camera here real quick and make sure that you can see that well enough. Yep, looks like you can. Okay, so the triangle is going to be the basis for the body, the head portion, and then we'll take the ears off the top. Before I put the ears on, I want to add some eyes, and I'm going to do those eyes kind of just down from the top just a little bit, like right in here. So what I'm going to do is use this line kind of as the center point for my eye. And I'm going to draw like a little partial circle. And I'm going to make it a little wider off the other side. So we end up with something like that. And we'll do the same thing on this side. We're going to try and make them approximately the same size, but because it's whimsical, we've got some artistic license, so we're not going to stress too much if those eyes are not exactly the same size. Okay? So with my eyes in place, that's going to give me some bearing for my ears. So what I'm going to want to do is start my ears just slightly above the top of my triangle. And I'm just going to bring my ear kind of up, out at the top, and down so that it meets that triangle, like the ear would be coming back in to meet the body. And I'm going to do the same thing coming off this other side, right back in to meet the body. Okay? And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to erase the top of my triangle so that what I'm left with is great big ears coming right back in to meet the body, and I don't have any line of demarcation there at the top. I am also very lightly going to kind of sketch Actually, here, I'll do it dark so you can see. I'm going to come back and erase these a little bit before we paint. But I'm going to come back and kind of sketch in the inner portion of the ear. So something kind of like that. Okay. We need to give him some legs, and then we'll give it a nose and the rest of the face. So down here at the bottom, I want to have 2 feet at the front. So maybe something like a couple little football shapes or ovals down here at the bottom. And then I'm going to run a couple of lines up for the legs that connect to those. And these are just really sketchy. They're not really well defined. They're not drawn, you know, to look like maybe paws that have toes. That's a really bad drawing of a paw. We're not getting real complicated with this because this is whimsical. We've got some leeway. So I just want to make the notation of some feet here. If you want to make it look like it has some toes, certainly you could put some little lines in here that separate that out and make it look like toes. And I'm also going to add a couple more kind of oval shapes, a little bit extended longer than the ones that we used here for the back feet. So this rabbit is sitting with his front feet in front of him, and you can just see kind of the little back feet poking through under his body. Okay. I am going to come in and erase this bottom line from my triangle. And put any of those lines back in for the feet that I need to. Okay? So fairly quick and easy. We used the bottom line of the triangle kind of as a midway point and drew these ovals half on each side of that bottom line of the triangle for the 2 front feet and the 2 back feet. There's my eyes, there's my ears. We need to give this rabbit a nose. So I'm going to come down right about here and make a V shape. Don't make it too terribly pointed. We want it to be rounded off a little bit. So there's a V for my nose. If you would rather have less of a V and more of a curve, you could do something like that as well. Rabbits have that little split in their nose, so we're going to make a little line come down. And then I'm just going to give it a couple little curves right there on the bottom. So we have nose and our little rabbit mouth. And when we finish up, I'm probably going to put a little half circle down here for like a little, making a little open mouth look or a little tongue look. You don't have to draw that in right now though. We can do that after we do the painting when we're adding all of the pen accents on top. So with that, we've got the basis of our rabbit. I'm going to erase these lines a little bit. I did them extra dark so that you guys can see them on camera because I know sometimes really light, sketchy pencil lines don't show up really well, and I wanted you to see this. So I'm going to come back with my eraser, and everybody always asks me what I use for an eraser. I love the Pentel high polymer white erasers. They work really, really well. And they're really good for doing something like this where I'm going back and just lightly erasing so that I've just got a shadow of these lines left. With just a little bit of pressure, it does a really good job of that. So I'm just coming back right over the top so that I've only got just the lightest of lines still showing. And that is, if you've watched other videos, you know why this is. I wish we had like automatic feedback so you guys could tell me why we do this. We do this because I don't want these pencil lines to show through my paint. Watercolor paint is pretty transparent, it can be more or less transparent depending on the color and the type of paint that you're using, but generally watercolor is fairly transparent. So if I come in with some light colors and I paint over this, I might see some of these lines through my paint. And once I've painted over those lines, you cannot erase them. They're not coming out from under that paint. So I'm just going back and erasing real lightly so my lines are just barely there. I can still see them just enough for it to act as a guide. Now, because we are going to make this bunny look, you know, kind of hairy and furry, there is a little bit of leeway. So if your lines are a little bit dark here and there, and after you put some paint on, you can see the lines through, chances of us covering those up with the pen as we're doing highlights and adding some extra things is pretty good. So I wouldn't stress about that too much on this particular painting. Okay. So with that said, we have got our little rabbit drawn. We've got him erased so that I can't see the lines really well. And now we're going to add some paint. As with everything we paint, you get to decide what color you want your rabbit. It does not have to be real rabbit colors, meaning it doesn't have to be gray, doesn't have to be brown, doesn't have to be black, doesn't have to be white. I'm going to use blue, I think, for mine. I have a nice kind of light blue in this set. And I think I want my rabbit to be kind of lighter colors. Generally, I go fairly vibrant and bold, but I think I want this little guy to be on the lighter side today, which is just kind of stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit and trying something different. I'm not going to paint the entire rabbit. I'm going to just drop little color highlights here and there. Okay, and I think before I do that, I'm going to erase just a little bit more inside the ears. So what I'm going to do is get my blue wet. So I'm just dipping my brush in the water, running it around the paint, getting it nice and inky. If you want to kind of scoop this out with your brush and mix it on a plate or something else, you can certainly do that. I'm just going to leave it in my paint pan because I'm a little bit lazy. If you've got a paint set that you can mix in the lid, you could certainly do that as well. I've already got quite a bit of paint over there, so I'm not going to do too much mixing in that lid. And I'm just going to start dropping some color in here and there. So I'm going to start with this ear. And I'm just going to kind of run a little strip down there, and then I'm going to rinse my brush off and come back with just a clean wet brush and just kind of scrub over that blue a little bit so that it's kind of fading it out as I go. I'm leaving it darker here, but I'm coming back with a clean wet brush and just kind of spreading it out a little bit so it starts to look a little like cloudy and kind of barely there in some spots. And it kind of gives us a fade from dark to light. And I'm going to do something real similar on this other side. But I think I'm going to put my blue on the inside of the ear rather than the outside. And again, I'm going to clean my brush off, and I'm coming back with just a wet, clean brush and just kind of running over the edges to smooth those edges out a little bit. Let them fade out all the way to the edge of the ear so that I don't have any really hard defined lines with my paint. Now, if you want to come back and add a little more, like up here at the top of the ear where it's still wet, and let it just kind of disperse out like watercolor does, absolutely you could do that. You could do the same thing on this ear over here if you want a little darker in spots, right? And I am also, I think, going to come back with just a little bit of brown. I've got a brown in this set. And I'm going to mix it off to the side a little bit because I don't want it very dark, and a brown can often be overpowering depending on the brown that you've got. So I pulled some of the paint over here with my brush, and then I added some more water to it because I want it to be really kind of washed out and light. I don't want it to be really, really dark. And I'm just going to come dot in some of that brown here and there on my ears. And I'm cleaning off my brush and coming back with it just wet here and there to kind of come back over those edges and try and smooth out some of the edges. I'm going to add just a little bit of brown, and you can see, hopefully this is picking up on camera, how intense a brown can be. I actually dipped it in my pan instead of in what I had watered down, just because that's a bad habit. And so when I put it on, it was fairly dark. So I just tipped my brush really lightly, and when I saw how dark that was, I rinsed my brush off and came back with just a clean brush and water to kind of spread it out a little bit. So you'll notice I'm not making, you know, solid lines of brown or blue or any color. I'm just kind of making them cloudy and wispy and not well defined. And I'm doing that by just dropping a little bit of paint in, cleaning my brush off, and coming back with a wet brush and just smoothing that around so that it feathers out those lines a bit. And I'm going to continue that same thing down into the body of my rabbit. So I'm going to come back with a little bit of blue again. And I'm just dropping it in here and there. There's really no rhyme or reason to this, so you kind of get to pick and choose where you want your color to be. And then I'm rinsing off my brush and coming back and just kind of feathering out those edges. If you need to rinse your brush again to put more water so that it can feather out even more. And then I'm going to come back and drop just a little bit right back in where it's wet, because where it's wet, it lets it disperse out. So it keeps kind of those feathery, that feathery line look going. And I'm going to do kind of the same thing over here. Clean my brush off, come back with just water, feather it out. And I think I'm going to grab a little bit of brown maybe and put a little bit of brown right there. So again, clean my brush off, come back, feather it out. Now this is going to be fairly light when it dries. Watercolor does dry lighter than it looks when it's wet, and we're using fairly light paint to begin with. We've got it watered down pretty good. I think I'm going to come down here by the feet, put some blue in down here, and again rinse my brush off and come back watered down. And I am going right along the tops of the feet where I drew them and up the side of this leg, because think about it like this rabbit sitting there with its feet down. There's going to be a little bit of a shadow around those front legs. So I want it to be a little bit darker, kind of right down here where the front legs and the body meet. So I'm leaving a little bit more paint in that corner, but then I'm going to come feather it out up towards the top. Okay? And I'm going to do the same thing right down here in the middle where the legs come together. Again, there's going to be a little bit of a shadow there. So by making that a little darker, we're going to look like, it's going to make it look like the legs are at the surface and this darker part is the body back behind it. And that's how it would look if we were sitting looking straight on at this rabbit. The light's going to create shadows. So I'm leaving a little bit more color right down there in the corners. I'm coming back with a clean, wet brush and just dragging that paint out a little bit. And I'm doing this very, very lightly. I'm not using a lot of pressure on my brush. And then I'm going to come back and just drop another couple dots right down there. And we'll do the same thing over here. And I think with this one, just to keep our kind of brown theme going, I'm going to put a little bit of brown in that corner too. And I'm coming back with just a clean, wet brush. Drag it around. Rinse your brush off and come back with just water on your brush as many times as you need to get that all feathered out. But I am leaving just a little bit darker right down here in this corner. So I'm putting just a little bit more brown, a little bit more blue, and all I'm doing is just tapping my brush on there because it's already wet from the initial painting. Now I'm going to come back up here to the face, and I think I'm going to use a little brown for the nose. So I'm going to put some brown right here on the upside of the nose. And then again, rinse my brush off and come back and just feather it out. Leaving a little bit of dark right along that nose line. That's going to define the nose of my rabbit. Rinse my brush off, just clean water, feather it out. So at this point, you're just going to kind of fiddle around with the paint a little bit. Step back from it and take a look if you need to, so you can kind of get a feel for how it's looking overall. I do need to finish my legs down here. So I think I'm going to come in with just a little bit of blue right at the bottom of my feet. Again, with the idea that the bottom is going to be a little bit darker than the top. There's going to be a shadow down there at the bottom of the feet. So I've dropped in a little bit of color. I'm coming back with a clean wet brush, and I'm just going to feather that out a little bit. Now, how often do you need to rinse your brush when you're doing a technique like this? It's really hard to tell you because different brands of paint spread differently. They have different consistencies. So you kind of have to play around a little bit. There is absolutely nothing wrong with sitting down with just a piece of paper and a brush and your paints and trying this kind of feathering out paint technique so that you can get an idea how the paints you're using are going to work, because they're all going to work a little bit differently. And even if you have 2 or 3 different brands of paint that you use, they're all going to work just a little bit differently. Even different paint colors within the same brand will work differently depending on the pigment that's been used to make that color. So at this point, I'm just about done. I just need to finish these last 2 little feet here. So I'm going to do kind of the same thing. I'm going to put my color right at the bottom of the feet. And then I'm going to come back with a clean brush and kind of sweep it up. I do want to be really mindful about what I'm doing here so that I'm keeping definition where those legs are. So I'm making sure that the paint that I'm sweeping up is not blending into the darker paint on each side, because I need to leave some definition for these legs. We are going to come back with a pen or a pencil and define them, but I want to make sure that those colors don't blend together there. Okay, so I do believe that's what I've got for my rabbit. So at this point, you may, let me see, these colors are awful light, so it's kind of hard. I'm hoping they show up well enough on the camera. At this point, you may want to pause your video and go dry your painting, because like I mentioned before, watercolors dry lighter than what they look when they're wet. So if you pause this and go dry it, hit it with a blow dryer on like a medium or cool setting. We're just going for the air movement to dry it, not the heat, because the heat from a blow dryer can mess with the pigment sometimes. And by mess with it, I mean it can change the way that color looks. So go hit it with a blow dryer if you want, or if you don't have a blow dryer handy, pause the video, set this aside for 15-20 minutes, then come back to it. That'll give it plenty of time to dry. And as those colors lighten up, you'll get a better feel for what this is looking like overall. If you decide that you want your rabbit darker, you can come back and do that exact same thing with the same colors in the same spots. Adding that second layer of color is just going to deepen these colors and make them richer and brighter. I'm going for lighter today. I think this is kind of what I'm liking for mine. But certainly let yours dry and then come back and see what it looks like. If you want to add some additional paint to it so that it's a little brighter and more vibrant, go ahead and add a second coat to this before we move on to the rest, okay? I'm gonna go dry mine and I will be back in a minute. Okay, I've got mine dry and I'm kind of happy with where the color is, but I think I've decided I want to add a couple things to this just to make it a little more fun. One, I'm going to add a little tail off to the side just because I feel like he needs a tail. If you're sitting looking face on with the rabbit, obviously you're not going to see the whole tail, but he might just have a little foof sticking off to the side. So with just a little bit of my blue, I'm going to kind of give him a little bit of a tail there. Come back again with just plain water on a clean brush. Spread it around. I might add a little bit of brown right there, just so he's got a little tail sticking off the back there. And the other thing I want to do, I've decided, is I want to add a flower. Like this little rabbit is holding a flower in his teeth. So to do this flower, I'm going to turn my painting sideways, just because it's going to be a little easier angle for me to work from. And I'm going to give it a little flower over here, and the stem is going to come across like it's holding it in its teeth. Okay, so to do this flower, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow, and I'm going to use a little bit of probably pink or red. Again, you can choose whatever color you would like for your flowers. So I'm getting my yellow wet, and I'm just going to come straight from the pan on this one. And over here off to the side, I'm going to paint a little yellow gumdrop. So something like that. And then I'm going to come back, we'll use some red. So I'm getting my red wet, and I'm going to come straight from my pan with the red as well. I'm going to make sure it's pretty wet and inky on the top, because red, much like the brown, is going to be pretty vibrant. So I don't want it to be too intense. I want it pretty watery on the top, so I can just dip the tip of my brush in the water. I'm not going to really swirl it around in the red once I've got it mixed up. I'm just going to dip my brush in the top of there and paint with kind of that chiseled tip. And I'm going to make a teardrop shape right here in the middle. And I'm going to have it run right up against that yellow and just touch into the yellow. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. So just kind of a teardrop again. And I'm going to do the same thing coming up over here. Oops. That one to be kind of fat. And I'm going to have all of these just touch lightly into that yellow. Now, if it starts looking like you've got too much red going up in the yellow, rinse your brush off so that it's clean, and come back and just drag it down into the flower petal. So you'll end up with some yellow in the petals, and that's really what we're going for. So I cleaned my brush. I'm going to get just a little bit of red again, and I'm going to come over here, do another teardrop. If you feel more comfortable drawing this in pencil first rather than just going in with the brush, certainly you could draw this in with pencil first and then paint it like we did the rabbit. And then I'm going to do the same thing right over here. These two on the end, I'm kind of giving them a little bit of a curved teardrop shape. But again, I'm going right up against that yellow. So what I end up with is a little bit of red in the yellow and a little bit of yellow in the red. So it looks like they're all kind of running together. And then I'm going to come back and just the tip of my brush in my brown. And I'm just going to kind of dot it right along the bottom where that yellow meets the red. Okay? We do need to add a stem on that. Before I put a stem on this, though, I want this to be good and dry. So pause your video here and go dry your flower before we do the stem part. Okay, so the reason we needed that to be dry before we do the stem is because the green of my stem is going to run right up against that red. And if the red were still wet, the green would bleed into that and we'd end up with a whole lot of brown. And that's not what I want. I want my stem to be defined. So from my set here, I've got two different greens. I think I'm going to go with a little bit of the darker green. So I'm just getting that wet, run the brush through it, and then I'm going to clean my brush off because the green, like the red and the brown, can be pretty intense. So I clean my brush off and I'm going to come back and just dip the tip of my brush in that inky paint at the top. And I want my stem to run kind of this way so that it looks like he's holding it in his teeth. So I'm going to start about right here, just the tip of my paintbrush, and just run it right across. Because the paint underneath is fairly light, it's not going to show through into the green, so I'm not going to have a problem with that. And I think I might want one leaf coming off the side. Just like that. Okay. Now, if you want to add more flowers to yours, certainly do that. I think I am going to add, sorry, my shoe just fell off. I couldn't find it. I think I'm going to add some grass along the bottom and give it a ground line down here at the bottom. So with that same green, I'm just going to clean off my brush again, make sure I got nothing else on it. Lightly dip the tip of my brush in that green. And I'm just going to make some swipes down here at the bottom. You can run them over onto your rabbit if you want. And just make it look like a little bush there sitting next to him. If you want, you can rinse your brush off and come back with just water. Paint the water down here and then run it up into that green and kind of let it pull down. And I'm maybe going to do another one right over here off the side. So there's really not a lot of formal shape to these. You're just kind of swiping your brush back and forth. And I'm going to do the same thing. Clean it off, come back with water, and just let that water run right up into that bush and just spread it out. So that's going to give me kind of the illusion of some ground down there without it being too terribly structured. It's kind of in keeping with the loose whimsical idea that we've got going on here. And I'm going to do it one more time right over here. And same thing, I'm going to rinse off my brush, come back with just clean water, let it run into that bush and pull that green that it picks up just around down here at the bottom. Like I said, it just kind of gives me that illusion of ground without it being too terribly structured and, you know, formal, because we don't want it to be really, really stiff if we're doing something whimsical. Okay, so at this point, I think I've got all the paint I want on here for right now. So I'm going to pause and go dry mine. You do the same thing, and then we're going to come back and add all of our accents with the pen and finish it up, okay? Okay, all of my paint is dry. We're back to that hot mess stage again that I love so much, because this is where the trust has to come in that what we're doing is actually going to work. I love this point in a painting because you look at it and you're like, oh, I'm just not really sure this is going to work. But then when we add all the accents in with the pen, it just somehow magically comes together. So that's what we're going to do with this. Now, when we outline this rabbit, I don't want to do it really stiffly, meaning I don't want just, you know, solid outline all the way around it. I'm going to do it kind of sketchy, and I'm going to add in some zigzags here and there so that we kind of hopefully maybe look a little bit like fur. So I decided I am going to do it with my pen, but when I do it, I'm really kind of doing it pretty sketchy. So I don't have solid lines. So, you know, kind of sketch back and forth, and then here and there put like some zigzags So you got some fur going. That is how we're going to outline the rabbit. And we're going to do that same thing all the way around the entire outline, making it look like there's fur here and there. So I'm going to speed up the video here in just a minute. Real quick, I want to show you the inside of the ear, because we had made those lines for the inside of the ear. And essentially we're going to kind of do the same things there. Just do it loosely so that it looks like it might be kind of furry and fuzzy. Okay, so I'm going to speed my video up, and we're going to do this same thing all the way around the rabbit, and then we'll come back and talk about what we're going to do with it from there. Okay, so we've got the outside of the rabbit itself outlined. I did outline my eyes pretty strictly, and I'm going to color those in because this is the other part of doing something like this that has eyes. It really doesn't take on any kind of character for me until the eyes are done. So I'm gonna do the eyes now, and then we'll do the rest of it, just because it drives me crazy to have those two white eyes just staring at me like they're lifeless. So what I'm gonna do is make a little circle at the top of each of them. And I'm gonna leave that little circle white, and I'm gonna black in everything around it. So I'm just going to color the rest of this in. You could certainly do this with black paint if you wanted to, but I find it's often easier to do it with the marker, and since we're using the marker anyway, why not? There's nothing wrong with using more than one art supply in a painting. It doesn't have to be all watercolor. So there we go. The eyes have a little bit of personality now, so I feel better. So I'm going to kind of finish just outlining the rest of this. You don't have to stick to all of it very specifically. For instance, on my flower, I may just go up this one side of the stem. I may not do the other side of the stem. I am going to come in and outline his nose and mouth to define that a little bit better. On my flower, I am going to leave the bottom where the yellow meets the pink, kind of a little jaggedy like that. And then outline my teardrops. Now, because we're going whimsical with this, I want to add a little more character and flair to this flower. So I'm going to come back and re-outline all of these petals, but I'm not going to stay on the same line. I'm going to let the lines come out a little bit and go back over themselves. I did another video where we did flowers like this. So if you want to see more of this technique, there is another video that does exactly this. And then I'm going to put some little shoots with dots on them out of the top of my flower. I am going to come back and put just a little line partway down the middle of each petal. And then I'm going to put a couple dots on it. It's these kinds of little things, random lines, dots, weird shapes here and there, that bring the whimsical look into what you're doing. I am going to kind of do the same thing with the leaf. I didn't follow it very strictly. I did kind of like I did with the petals here, but then I did run a little line up the middle so that it gives it a split like a leaf, right? And I'm going to come back on the body of my rabbit here and there and just put like little hash marks so that it makes it look like little furry patches here and there. You can run them off the side, so you could do something like that off the side. I'm going to come up here in the middle and add some hair up there in the middle. And I might add a couple little hairs off the sides at the base of the ears. I do want to give it a few whiskers. So on either side of where that split is in the nose, I'm just gonna real lightly come off with some whiskers. And I might put a couple little furry spots there to further define the nose. You get to decide how many of those spots they're gonna be and where they're gonna be. Maybe in the ear, you want to do some little sketchy up the middle of the ear like that. And I'm just using my pen really, really lightly so that it kind of almost fades out as I get to the top of those lines. Give a little more definition to the ear. You could do the same thing down here on the tail and on the feet. You get to decide how much of that you're going to do on your rabbit. Now, at this point, oops, we forgot to do the bottom. I guess we need to do down here. I want to add a little bit of definition to my bottom like I did to the rabbit. So I'm just going to run a few lines here and there through my bushes. Not anything really defined. It just gives them a little bit of shape. And then I'm going to kind of do the same thing on the ground that I did with the rabbit. I'm going to outline it really loosely so that it just kind of flows. You might want to come down and add a couple little more lines down here on the ground just to give it a little character. So essentially, you know, we've kind of got this thing done at this point. If you wanted to stop here, you certainly could. Whimsical, often more is better. So certainly you could keep going if you wanted to. What do you do to keep going? You can continue adding different things on your rabbit. So for instance, I'm going to go put a little heart off the top of its ear. So I'm gonna put a little heart up there, and I'm gonna run that line right down into the ear. Does it make any sense? No, it doesn't. Whimsical doesn't necessarily make sense. This is not realistic, it's fun. So you can do things like that. Maybe off my flower, I want to put a couple little stars to go with my flower. And maybe off my rabbit down here. Here, I'm going to turn this sideways for a second. I've mentioned this in other videos. You don't have to leave your paper facing the same direction all the time. Turn it so that it's at an easy drawing angle for you. I'm going to put a little pine tree or two coming off the side of my rabbit here. Just because I can. And it's easier to draw at this angle with it sideways. So I turned it sideways for myself. So you can turn this paper whatever direction you need it to go to make it easy for you to draw, okay? I think I want a couple more hearts up here off this ear. So at this point in the game, you just keep playing with shapes and designs. If you want to draw them in with pencil first, so you kind of get the idea what they're going to look like, absolutely draw them in with pencil first. There is no harm in that. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do is add some splashy dots to this. In the background, I like the kind of splotched paint look. So rather than paint a whole background, I'm just going to kind of sprinkle some dots of paint here and there. And I'm going to do them in probably a blue. So I'm going to get my blue first, and all I'm doing is just wetting my paint, getting it real super inky. Load up my brush with it, and then I'm going to hold it over my paper, and I'm just going to tap it here and there to make splotches. Now, I'm probably not going to try and directly go over my rabbit. I'm going to try and keep it out over here. But if I get a few on the rabbit, it's perfectly okay. Now, do be careful what's around you while you do this, because the paint's going to splatter a little bit. So make sure you're doing it somewhere that it's not going to hurt anything. And I'm just tapping my brush until I get a few splotches of color on there, right? I'm going to come back, I think maybe with a little bit of red and do the same thing. Now, red is a darker color, so do be careful with that because it can get really overpowering. So go slow. You don't have to do this in a hurry. And maybe I'm going to come back with a little bit of brown too. Same thing with the brown. It can be an overpowering color, so take your time with it. You don't have to do these splotches really, really fast. And there we go. I think with that, we'll call it done. You are certainly welcome to work on yours as much as you like. Add as much to it as you want. If you're thinking about things to add to it in terms of, just continuing that whimsical look, think about things like straight hashed lines or circles, or even, here, I gotta set this aside for a second because it's wet. So think things like hash lines or circles here and there, or a combination. Circles with little hash lines in them, or any other shape. You could use squares, you could use triangles. Think spirals and curlicues. Okay, so for instance, I'm going to have to do this really carefully because he's all wet still. All those dots are wet. And you can certainly decide this after everything dries. If you want to come back and add more, there's no reason you can't come back and add more over the top once it's dry. And actually, yes, pause here. I'm going to go dry this and I'll be right back and show you what I'm talking about, okay? Okay, that's better, it's dry. I always think I'm going to show somebody one last thing while my painting's wet, and I am notorious for sticking my hand in wet paint and smearing it and making a mess, so I had to go dry mine. So, like I was saying, basic shapes, circles, lines, things like that. So maybe down here, I'm going to put just a few small circles on my rabbit. And up here, maybe a curlicue on the edge of his ear. And maybe I'm going to put just a couple of lines crossing the stem of my flower. Maybe a couple more going the other direction down here. And maybe a couple more circles right up there. And maybe on this leg right here, I'm going to put some curlicues. Does any of that make sense? No, it doesn't. But it's not supposed to because it's whimsical. Okay, so you can continue adding to your painting anything that you want like that, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. You put it wherever you want to put it. If you decide that your rabbit needs some eyebrows, draw on a couple little eyebrows, give it a little more character. If you feel like the nose is getting lost, come back and make the nose a little bit thicker. So at this point in the game, you're just kind of playing with this, adding to it, fine-tuning, refining, until you're happy with it. There's no set stop point. You get to decide when to stop. That, for me, is often the hardest part because I just keep wanting to add and add and add and add. But it's helpful sometimes to step back from it. Set it, at the other end of the table from you. Prop it up against something so that you can look at it and see what it looks like before deciding what else to do. If you're standing, right here this close to it the whole time you're working on it, you kind of lose a little bit of perspective in what it truly looks like. So set it up so that you can look at it across the table from you, even if you have to leave it there overnight or for a couple of days to look at it before you decide if it's done or if you want to add more to it. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to sit down and finish this whole thing in one sitting. Okay? So with that, I'm going to call that one done. Remember to always sign your paintings, however you choose to do that. I like to date them as well because it's always fun to look back over the years and watch your progress as you continue to draw and paint and see how your skills grow. with that, I'm going to leave you for today, I think. I'm going to peel the tape off while I tell you, if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. That way you get notified whenever there are new videos. So if you enjoy these, absolutely subscribe. Feel free to like and comment. I do respond to all the comments. Might take me a day or two, but I do read them and respond. And I appreciate hearing how you guys do when you're using these to create something. If you have suggestions for future paint-alongs, absolutely throw those in the comments as well. I like to hear what ideas you guys have. If you want to follow along for more of my art adventures, I would love for you to follow me on Instagram. I am at Painted Willow Art on Instagram. I also have some other classes and resources on my website at paintedwillowart.com. And also on Pinterest, I'm at Painted Willow Art. I pin lots of things on Pinterest for all of you to use as ideas. And there we go. There's our little rabbit. So thanks for watching, and I will be back with another video hopefully by next week. Thanks, everybody.